My name is Isabella, and at 34 I've spent my entire life living in my sister Celia's shadow. While she collected accolades and family praise, I quietly built my career away from her spotlight. Nobody in my family noticed my success. They were too busy admiring Celia. That monthly family dinner was supposed to be just another evening of her bragging, until it became the night that changed everything between us. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had someone underestimate you. Because trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. Growing up with Celia was like constantly standing next to the sun. You might be there but nobody notices you because they're too busy being dazzled by the brightness. My sister is 3 years older than me, and from the moment I could understand the world around me, I realized that our parents had a clear favorite. When Celia brought home her first grade artwork, it went straight to the refrigerator with exclamations of, "Look at our little artist." When I brought home mine 2 years later, my mother absent-mindedly stuck it on the side of the prudent fridge already covered by Celia's newer masterpieces. This pattern continued throughout our childhood, subtle at times, glaringly obvious at others. By middle school, Celia had already established herself as the academic star of the family. She won the regional spelling bee in 6th grade, and our parents threw her a celebration dinner with all the relatives. My parents took photos of her holding her trophy from every angle, making sure to document this momentous achievement. 3 years later, when I won the state science fair with my project on renewable energy, my parents said, "That's nice, honey," and asked if I'd remembered to take out the trash. The real showcase of my parents' favoritism came during high school. Celia was the classic overachiever debate team, captain, student body president, and founder of the community outreach program that got featured in the local newspaper. At dinner, conversations revolved around Celia's latest accomplishment, while my straight A's and position as editor of the school newspaper barely warranted a nod. I remember one particular evening that crystallized everything for me. I had just been selected for a prestigious summer journalism program at Northwestern University. Only 10 students from across the country were chosen. I was bursting with excitement when I came home, ready to finally share something my parents would have to acknowledge as special. "Mom, Dad, I got accepted into the Northwestern journalism program," I announced as I walked into the kitchen. "That's nice, Isabella," my mother said distractedly. "Did you hear that Celia was nominated for prom queen?" And just like that, my achievement was brushed aside for Celia's popularity contest. I sat through dinner listening to my parents gush about how everyone loved Celia, how she was bound to win because she was so special, so talented, so perfect. It wasn't just my parents, though. Celia herself had perfected the art of putting me down to elevate herself. "Isabella's more of a behind-the-scenes person," she would tell people with a sympathetic smile. "Not everyone can be comfortable in the spotlight like me." She had mastered the backhanded compliment, "Isabella's so lucky, she doesn't have the pressure of high expectations like I do." Our high school graduation ceremonies were held 2 years apart, but they might as well have been in different universes. When Celia graduated as valedictorian, my parents invited extended family from 3 states away. They rented out a restaurant for the celebration and commissioned a professional photographer. My father couldn't stop telling everyone how his daughter was going to Princeton on a partial scholarship. When my graduation came around, we had a small dinner at home. Despite graduating 3rd in my class, the conversation somehow turned to Celia's freshman year successes at Princeton. My acceptance to the state university was met with what felt like disappointment, though they never said it outright. "It's a perfectly good school," my mother said, in the same tone she might use to describe a mediocre restaurant. Through all of this, I never confronted them. I never demanded the recognition I deserved. Instead, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would build my own path away from Celia's shadow, and I would succeed on my own terms. I didn't need their validation, I would find my own. While Celia headed off to Princeton with our parents' gushing approval, I began my journey at the state university with little fanfare. The contrast between our college experiences couldn't have been more pronounced, not just in our parents' reactions but in our approaches to education. Celia chose Princeton because of its prestige and history. She majored in international relations because it sounded impressive at dinner parties. Every holiday break, she'd return home with stories about famous professors, exclusive social events, and connections to powerful families. Our parents soaked up every word, eyes shining with pride. Professor Huntington, you know, the one who advised 3 presidents, told me I have a future in diplomacy, she announced during one Thanksgiving dinner. My father nearly choked on his turkey with excitement. My choice of school and major was far more strategic, though nobody bothered to ask why I made my decisions. I specifically selected the state university for its business program, which had deep connections to the emerging tech industry. While less prestigious than an Ivy League education, it offered something I valued more: practical experience and real-world connections. The state school has an incubator program for student startups, I tried explaining once. They've launched 3 companies that got major funding last year. That's nice, my mother said before turning to Celia. Tell us again about that United Nations simulation you participated in. While Celia was attending lectures in grand halls and networking at champagne receptions, I was rolling up my sleeves in coding workshops and business strategy hackathons. I secured an internship at Tech Future, a small but innovative startup that was developing cutting-edge customer analytics software. The company wasn't well known yet, which made it easy for my family to dismiss. Wouldn't you rather intern at a company people have actually heard of? Celia asked during winter break of my sophomore year. I'm interning at the State Department this summer. Dad already ordered new business cards for me. What my family didn't understand was that Tech Future's founder, Amanda Parker, had revolutionized data analytics at her previous company before striking out on her own. Working directly under her gave me insights into business strategy and product development that most business students only read about in textbooks. Amanda said my market analysis helped them pivot their core product, I shared at a family dinner. That's nice, my father said automatically. Celia, tell us about the ambassador you met last week. By junior year, I was spending 20 hours a week at Tech Future while maintaining my full course load. Amanda had become more than a boss. She was a mentor who saw potential in me that my family never had. She taught me how to identify market gaps, develop strategic plans, and most importantly, how to trust my own judgment. You have a natural talent for seeing where businesses need to go before they know it themselves. Amanda told me after I'd identified a crucial flaw in a competitor's approach. That's rare, Isabella. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Those words sustained me through family gatherings where Celia's internships at prestigious but ultimately meaningless positions were celebrated while my hands-on experience was ignored. During our respective senior years, the differences in our approaches became even clearer. Celia was focused on crafting the perfect resume, joining prestigious-sounding committees, and ensuring she had impressive titles to drop in conversation. I was busy helping Tech Future secure its first major client and learning how to navigate the complexities of scaling a business. Our graduations reflected these differences perfectly. Celia's Princeton graduation was an extravagant affair. My parents flew in a week early, attended every possible event, and hosted a dinner for Celia and her friends at an expensive restaurant. They took hundreds of photos, and my father made an emotional speech about how Celia was destined for greatness. My graduation was attended with obligation rather than excitement. My parents arrived the morning of the ceremony and left immediately after for a charity gala that Celia was attending in New York. There was no special dinner, no emotional speech, just a quick, "We're proud of you," before they rushed to the airport. I didn't let it bother me, though. By then, I had learned that external validation, especially from my family, wasn't what would drive my success. I had to plan skills that mattered in the real world and the confidence that came from actually building something rather than just talking about it. After graduation, our career paths diverged even further. Celia landed an entry-level position at Mata Corporation, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. It wasn't a particularly impressive role, essentially an administrative assistant to a mid-level manager, but the company name carried weight, and Celia knew how to leverage that. Meta Corporation is basically shaping the future of technology, she boasted during a family dinner shortly after starting. I'm right in the center of it all. Meanwhile, I had received an offer from Bluestream Technologies, a well-established firm with a good reputation. The salary was excellent, and the position would look impressive on my resume. But Amanda had asked me to stay on at TechFuture, in a full-time strategy role as they expanded. You'll be taking a risk, Amanda warned me honestly. We're still finding our footing. The salary is lower than what you could get elsewhere, and there's no guarantee we'll succeed. But you'll have real responsibility and equity if we do make it. I chose TechFuture without hesitation, a decision that my family led by Celia deemed foolish. You're turning down Bluestream for a company nobody's heard of. Celia laughed when I announced my decision. This is why you'll always be a step behind Isabella. You don't think big picture. My mother frowned. Are you sure that's wise, honey? A good name on your resume can open so many doors. TechFuture is doing innovative work, I tried explaining, and I'll have input on company strategy from day one. Strategy input at a tiny startup versus being at Meta, my father mused. It's not really comparable, is it? For the first year, things at TechFuture were exciting. We secured 2 major clients, expanded our team, and our technology was starting to get attention in industry publications. I was thriving in my role, helping shape product direction and client acquisition strategies. Amanda continued to mentor me, pushing me to develop skills in areas I hadn't considered before. Then the market shifted. A larger competitor released a similar product at a fraction of our cost. 2 of our major clients didn't renew their contracts. Suddenly, TechFuture was struggling to stay afloat. We downsized from 15 employees to 8. Amanda and I worked around the clock trying to pivot our offering, but investment money dried up. This is exactly why you go with established companies, Celia said smugly, when I mentioned our challenges during a phone call. I just got my first performance bonus at Meta. They're stable, secure. After 18 months of fighting to save TechFuture, Amanda called us all together with tears in her eyes. We've run out of runway, she said simply. I'm so sorry, everyone. Just like that, I was unemployed. TechFuture closed its doors, and I found myself with a resume that featured a failed startup as my only post-college experience. Celia, of course, wasted no time in pointing this out. This is what happens when you try to take shortcuts, she told me during our parents' anniversary dinner. While you were playing entrepreneur, I've been building a solid career foundation. She had recently been promoted to executive assistant to a senior director, a fact she managed to mention at least 5 times that evening. The next few months were difficult. I applied to dozens of positions but rarely got callbacks. When I did get interviews, they inevitably asked about TechFuture's failure, probing for what went wrong. My confidence, once so solid, began to waver. I was at a coffee shop revising my resume for the 20th time when someone called my name. I looked up to see Richard Bennett, a venture capitalist, who had met with Amanda and me during TechFuture's final fundraising attempt. Isabella Parker, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I've been wondering what happened to you. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Richard had been impressed by my strategic analysis during our previous meeting, even though his firm had ultimately passed on the investment. You identified every weakness in your own business model before I could, he recalled. That level of honest self-assessment is rare. Richard was now working with Vertex Systems, a mid-sized tech company that specialized in enterprise software. They're looking for someone in their strategy department, he said. It's a junior role, but with your background, you could add real value. Would you be interested? 2 weeks later, I started at Vertex Systems as a junior strategy analyst. The role was several levels below where I'd been at TechFuture, but I was grateful for the opportunity. The company had a solid product, but was struggling to differentiate itself in a crowded market. I quickly noticed that my colleagues avoided certain projects, the ones deemed too challenging or risky. I volunteered for them. The first was a complete reassessment of a product line that was underperforming. After weeks of analysis, I presented a counterintuitive strategy, discontinue the current version, and rebuild it from scratch, with a focus on a specific industry vertical that competitors were ignoring. This is either brilliant or career suicide, my manager told me bluntly. 6 months later, the rebuilt product had gained significant traction in the targeted vertical, bringing in 3 major clients that had previously dismissed Vertex. My reputation within the company shifted overnight. I was no longer the junior analyst from a failed startup. I was the strategist who saw opportunities others missed. When I called my parents to share this success, they seemed distracted. "That's wonderful, dear," my mother said quickly. "Did you hear Celia's been asked to represent Mata at an industry conference? She might even be on a panel." I hung up the phone, smiling to myself. For the first time, their dismissal didn't sting. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found my path, and I was just getting started. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. While Celia continued to climb the corporate ladder at Mata Corporation, moving from executive assistant to coordinator to junior manager, I was carving out my own path at Vertex Systems. My revival of the struggling product line had earned me a promotion to senior strategy analyst, and from there, my trajectory had been steadily upward. I led the acquisition analysis for 2 smaller companies that expanded our market reach, developed a partnership strategy that opened new revenue streams, and eventually was promoted to Director of Corporate Strategy at the age of 32. What made me particularly effective was my ability to see beyond surface metrics. While others chased quarterly numbers, I focused on building sustainable advantages. When our main competitor launched a flashy new feature, I advised against a reactive response, and instead pushed us to strengthen our core, offering a move that retained 98% of our customers when the competitor's feature ultimately failed to deliver on its promises. "You have an uncanny ability to see around corners," my CEO commented after one particularly successful strategic pivot. Celia's career at Mata looked impressive on paper. She had the right titles, attended the right conferences, and knew how to sell her accomplishments. But those who worked closely with her knew that her roles were more about appearance than substance. She managed projects that were already predetermined to succeed, and took credit for team accomplishments while deflecting blame for failures. "I've been put on Mata's fast-track program," she announced during a Christmas gathering. "Only 2% of employees are selected." What she didn't mention was that the program was largely ceremonial, a way for Mata to make mid-level managers feel special, without actually investing in their development. I knew this because Vertex had recently hired a former Mata executive who had shared these insights during a strategy meeting. Despite my growing success at Vertex, family gatherings continued to revolve around Celia's career. My parents still hung on her every word, their faces beaming with pride as she detailed her latest promotion or project. When the conversation turned to me, Celia would often interject with comments like, "Isabella's company is one of those smaller firms, right? It's probably less pressure than working at a major corporation like Mata." I had learned not to let these comments bother me. My confidence no longer depended on family recognition. I had the respect of my peers and leaders in the industry who actually understood the value of my work. What my family didn't know was that I had begun to receive calls from executive recruiters. At first, I dismissed them, happy with my trajectory at Vertex. But when the calls became more frequent and the positions more senior, I started to listen. I kept these opportunities private, not out of secrecy, but because I had learned that my achievements meant more to me when they weren't subject to my family's evaluation. When I received an Industry Innovation Award for a market expansion strategy I'd developed, I didn't even mention it to my parents or Celia. The recognition from people who understood the work was enough. Meanwhile, Celia had become insufferable about her career at Mata. Every conversation, every family gathering, every holiday became a stage for her to perform her corporate success story. She had recently been promoted to Senior Manager of Client Relations, a title she repeated so often it might as well have been her name. Senior Manager of Client Relations at Mata Corporation became her identity, her introduction, her constant refrain. What she didn't seem to realize was how transparent her insecurity had become. The more she boasted, the more obvious it was that she was seeking validation. I was working late one evening when my phone rang with an unknown number. Thinking it might be a client from the West Coast, I answered. "Is this Isabella Parker?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is. My name is Diane Robertson from Kingsley Executive Search. I'm calling regarding a confidential executive opportunity that I believe would be of interest to you." I'd received similar calls before, but something in her tone made me pay attention. "We've been retained to conduct a search for a new chief executive officer for a major technology corporation. Your name has been mentioned by several industry leaders as someone who has the strategic vision this company needs right now." I nearly dropped my phone when she named the company Mata Corporation. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I've never worked at Mata." "This isn't a mistake, Miss Parker. The board is specifically looking outside their current leadership. They need someone who can help them innovate again. Your track record at Vertex speaks for itself." After confirming that the opportunity was legitimate, I agreed to a preliminary conversation with 2 board members the following week. I told no one, not my colleagues at Vertex, not my friends, and certainly not my family, especially not Celia. 2 days later, as if on cue, Celia called me. "Guess who just got another promotion?" she sang into the phone, without even saying hello. "Congratulations," I said automatically. "Deputy Director of Strategic Client Engagement," she announced proudly. "It's a newly created position that reports directly to the Executive Vice President." "That's great, Celia," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "What's new with you?" "Still at that same company?" she asked, though I knew she didn't really care about the answer. "Yes, still at Vertex." "Well, not everyone can have a fast-tracked career," she said with that familiar condescension. "Some people just peak early. Anyway, make sure you come to Mom and Dad's for dinner next month. I want to tell everyone about my new office on the executive floor." As I hung up, I wondered what Celia would say if she knew I was being considered to become her company's CEO. The thought was both amusing and unsettling. But I pushed it aside. The possibility was still remote, and I had work to do if I wanted to be taken seriously for such a position. The initial conversation with Mata Corporation's board members went surprisingly well. What had started as an exploratory discussion turned into a 3-hour deep dive into Mata's challenges and my thoughts on addressing them. "We're impressed with your candor," Miss Parker said. Harold Kingsley, the board chairman. "Most candidates spend these meetings telling us how great we are." "Mata is an iconic company," I replied honestly. "But you've lost your innovation edge. Your core products haven't evolved significantly in 5 years, and your market share is eroding to more agile competitors." Rather than being offended, the board members leaned in. Over the next few weeks, I participated in a series of increasingly intensive interviews. Each time, I was asked to sign additional confidentiality agreements. The board was keeping the CEO search extremely private. Even most of Mata's executives didn't know it was happening. For the final round, I was asked to prepare a comprehensive presentation on my vision for Mata's future. I spent weeks researching the company, its products, market position, and culture. I analyzed their financials, spoke with former employees, and studied their competitors. I even became a customer of several Mata products to experience them firsthand. The night before my presentation, Celia called again. "You'll never believe what happened today," she gushed without preamble. "I've been asked to lead a special project for the executive committee. It's very hush-hush, but it's going to be huge for my career." "That sounds exciting," I said, distracted by my preparation. "This is the kind of opportunity you get at a major corporation," she continued. "I don't mean to be harsh, but your little company just doesn't operate at this level. You should consider applying to Mata. I could probably get your resume in front of HR. You'd have to start lower, of course, but it would be a step up from where you are." I bit my tongue. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm happy where I am." "Suit yourself," she sighed. "Just don't come crying to me in 5 years when you're still in the same position while I'm running a division." After we hung up, I returned to my presentation with renewed focus. The next day, I delivered my vision to the board, a complete reimagining of Mada's approach to innovation, customer engagement, and market strategy. I outlined specific steps for the first 100 days, the first year, and a 3-year transformation plan. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Miss Parker Harold finally said, "Would you mind stepping outside while we confer?" I waited in an adjacent room for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When I was called back in, Harold stood to greet me. "Isabella," he said, using my first name for the first time, "we'd like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Mada Corporation." Despite having prepared myself for this possibility, the reality of it hit me like a physical force. This wasn't just any CEO position. This was Mada, one of the largest tech companies in the country, and it was Celia's company. "The board has unanimously agreed that you represent the future Mada needs," Harold continued. "Your compensation package will include." He outlined a salary and benefits package that made my current compensation seem like pocket change. "We'd like to announce your appointment at the beginning of next month," he concluded. "Can we count on you to join us?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said firmly. "I would be honored to accept the position." As I left the Mada headquarters, I felt a strange mix of emotions: pride in what I had accomplished, excitement for the challenge ahead, and a complicated anticipation about how this would affect my relationship with Celia. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of confidential meetings, contract negotiations, and transition planning. I gave notice at Vertex, sharing only that I had accepted a position elsewhere. My CEO was disappointed, but understanding. "Whoever got you is lucky," he said sincerely. "If you ever want to come back, just say the word." Through it all, I maintained absolute secrecy about my new role. The board and I had agreed that the announcement would come as a press release on Monday morning, following the family dinner at my parents' house on Sunday night. The timing wasn't intentional. It was simply when the paperwork and transition details would be finalized. As Sunday approached, I felt increasingly nervous about the dinner. Not because of the CEO announcement, the timing of that was coincidental, but because I knew that once the news broke, my relationship with Celia would be forever changed. Part of me hoped this might finally earn her respect. Another part worried it would only deepen the rift between us. What I didn't anticipate was that Celia would choose this particular family dinner to be more condescending than ever before. Sunday evening arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' suburban home with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The familiar 2-story colonial looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, meticulously maintained by my father, with my mother's prized rose bushes framing the front walkway. This house had been the stage for countless family dinners where Celia was the star and I was at best a supporting character. Tonight would be different, though, not in the way anyone expected. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror before getting out of the car. I had deliberately dressed down in jeans and a casual blouse. Tomorrow I would step into Mada Corporation as its new CEO, but tonight I was just Isabella, the younger sister, who, according to family mythology, had never quite measured up. "Isabella, you're early," my mother exclaimed as she opened the door. She gave me a quick hug before turning back to the kitchen. "Your father's watching the game. Celia called to say she's running a bit late. Something about an important work call." Of course she was late. Celia had perfected the art of the grand entrance years ago. My father looked up briefly from the television when I entered the living room. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his eyes quickly returning to the screen. "How's work?" "It's good," I said, simply knowing from experience that detailed answers about my career were met with polite disinterest. My cousin Rachel and her husband Dave arrived next, followed by my Aunt Patricia and Uncle James. Small talk filled the time as we waited for Celia. Rachel was in the middle of telling me about her new job as a teacher when the front door swung open dramatically. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," Celia announced, sweeping into the room like a celebrity arriving at a premiere. She was impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her hair and makeup flawless. She carried a shopping bag filled with what appeared to be expensive gifts. Work has been absolutely crazy. But I brought presents. My parents immediately gravitated toward her, my mother fussing over her appearance while my father took the shopping bag. You shouldn't have, sweetie, he said, though his pleased expression suggested he thought she absolutely should have. Celia distributed her gifts with flourish, an expensive bottle of scotch for my father, a designer scarf for my mother, and various luxury items for everyone else. When she got to me, she handed over a small box with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A little something from my business trip to Paris, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I thought it would brighten up your office. I know how drab those small company workspaces can be. Inside was a small desk ornament from a Parisian boutique. It was actually quite lovely, but the gift came wrapped in a layer of condescension that was impossible to ignore. Thank you, I said, simply refusing to rise to the bait. Dinner was served and we all took our places at the table. Celia positioned herself at the center of attention as always. My mother had prepared Celia's favorite meal, roast beef with all the trimmings, another small reminder of the family hierarchy. So Celia, my father began eagerly tell us about this new promotion you mentioned on the phone. Celia's face lit up. This was clearly the moment she had been waiting for. Well, she began drawing out the word for dramatic effect. I've been appointed Deputy Director of Strategic Client Engagement at Mata. She paused, letting the impressive-sounding title hang in the air. It's a newly created position that reports directly to the Executive Vice President. My parents exchanged proud glances. What exactly does that role entail? Uncle James asked. Celia launched into an explanation that was heavy on corporate jargon but light on actual substance. I listened with interest, recognizing that the position, while it sounded impressive, was largely a lateral move, with a fancier title. From my extensive research into Mata's organizational structure, I knew that deputy director positions were often created to appease ambitious middle managers without giving them actual increased authority. That sounds very important, my mother said, beaming with pride. It is, Celia confirmed without a hint of modesty. The CEO himself signed off on my appointment. I nearly choked on my water at this. The current CEO was serving out his final days, and I knew for a fact he hadn't been involved in recent personnel decisions at Celia's level. What about you, Isabella? Aunt Patricia asked politely. How are things at your company, Vertex, isn't it? Before I could answer, Celia interjected. Isabella's still plugging away at the same place. Not everyone has the drive for a fast-track career. She turned to me with a look of false sympathy. How long have you been there now? 6 years. 7. Almost 7, I confirmed calmly. See, that's the difference between us, Celia continued, addressing the table rather than me. I've always been ambitious. I set goals, and I achieve them. Mata is the top tech company in the country, and I've already reached senior management. Meanwhile, she gestured vaguely in my direction. My father nodded appreciatively at Celia's assessment. Your sister has always known what she wanted, he said to me, as if I weren't already aware. Some people just aren't cut out for the corporate fast track, Celia continued, warming to her theme. And that's okay. The world needs worker bees too. I saw Rachel wince at Celia's condescension, but no one contradicted her. This was the established family dynamic after all. Celia shines, everyone applauds, and I fade into the background. I just got the most amazing office on the executive floor. Celia gushed, seamlessly changing the subject back to herself. Corner office, glass walls, view of the city. That's what happens when you work for a company like Mata. We're literally shaping the future of technology. She took a sip of wine before delivering what she clearly thought was her coup de grace. I hate to say it, but my sister's a nobody in the industry. Meanwhile, I just got promoted at Matacorp. The table fell silent at the harshness of her statement. Even my parents, who typically endorsed everything Celia said, looked uncomfortable. I set down my fork calmly and smiled. Congratulations on your promotion, Celia. That's quite an achievement. I paused, meeting her eyes across the table. And as it happens, I'm the new CEO there. The silence that followed was absolute. Every face at the table turned toward me in shock. "What did you just say?" Celia finally managed her voice barely above a whisper. "I said congratulations on your promotion. And I'm the new CEO of Meta Corporation effective tomorrow morning. The board's announcement goes out at 9 a.m. My father was the first to recover. You're going to be the CEO of Mata Celia's company." "Yes," I said simply. "The board approached me a few months ago. The process has been confidential until now." Celia's face had drained of all color. "That's not possible," she said. "They would have told us if they were replacing the CEO. I would have heard something." "Only the board and a few key executives were informed," I explained. "It's standard practice for CEO transitions to be handled confidentially until the formal announcement." But you work at Vertex," my mother stammered. "A much smaller company. How could you possibly?" "The board was specifically looking for someone with fresh perspectives," I said. "My track record at Vertex caught their attention. I've spent the last 2 months interviewing and developing a strategic plan for Mata's next phase of growth." Celia's expression had shifted from shock to something closer to horror as the reality sank in. "You're going to be my boss. My actual boss." "Technically, yes," I acknowledged. "Though several layers of management separate your position from the CEO's office." A tense silence fell over the table. My parents exchanged bewildered glances, clearly struggling to reconcile their perception of their daughters with this new reality. Celia abruptly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Excuse me," she muttered, before rushing from the room. My mother half rose as if to follow her, then sank back down, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Why didn't you tell us you were being considered for such an important position?" The question carried the weight of years of missed recognition, of achievements dismissed or overlooked. I could have pointed out that they had never shown much interest in my career before, but what would be the point? "I was bound by confidentiality," I said instead. "And honestly, I wanted to be sure it was happening before I shared the news." The rest of the dinner passed in a strange limbo. Celia didn't return to the table. My parents alternated between stunned silence and a barrage of questions about my new role. The dynamic had shifted so dramatically that no one quite knew how to behave. As I helped clear the dishes, my father approached me awkwardly. "I had no idea you were at this level in your career," he admitted. "Why didn't you ever talk about your successes?" I looked at him steadily. "I did, Dad. You just weren't listening." The morning after the family dinner, I arrived at Mata Corporation headquarters at 7:30, 2 hours before the official announcement would go out. The executive floor was quiet, with only a few early arrivals preparing for the day ahead. Harold Kingsley, the board chairman, met me at the elevator. "Ready for your first day, CEO Parker?" he asked with a warm smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied honestly. My new office was spacious and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. A team of assistants had prepared everything, computer setup, security credentials in place, even my name already on the door. It was surreal to see Isabella Parker, Chief Executive Officer, etched in elegant lettering on the glass. At exactly 9 o'clock, the company-wide email went out, followed immediately by a press release to the major business publications. Mata Corporation names Isabella Parker as new Chief Executive Officer. The headline read. By 9:15, my phone was flooded with congratulatory messages from colleagues, friends, and industry contacts. My parents called sounding both proud and slightly confused, as if they were still processing the revelation from the previous night. Celia was notably silent. At 10 o'clock, I held my first executive team meeting. These were the senior leaders of Mata, men and women, who had been running the company for years. Most had been aware of the CEO search, but were meeting me for the first time. I could see the apprehension in some faces, curiosity in others, and open skepticism in a few. "I know I'm not who many of you expected," I began candidly. "I come from outside Mata, and I have different perspectives on where this company needs to go. But I'm here because I believe in Mata's potential, and I believe we can reclaim our position as the most innovative company in the industry. I outlined my vision, briefly emphasizing that I wanted to spend the first few weeks listening and learning before making any major changes. My door is open, I concluded. I want to hear from all of you. Your insights, your concerns, your ideas. We're going to build Meta's future together. By lunchtime, word of my appointment had spread throughout the company. Employees were gathered in break rooms and hallways discussing what this unexpected leadership change might mean. I had anticipated this reaction and had scheduled a company-wide town hall for later that afternoon. What I hadn't anticipated was running into Celia in the executive floor bathroom. She was standing at the sink when I walked in, and our eyes met in the mirror. She looked like she hadn't slept her normally, perfect appearance slightly disheveled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Congratulations," she finally said, her voice flat. "Quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied simply. "Did you plan this?" she asked suddenly. "Was this some kind of revenge plot? Wait until I've built my career at Meta, and then swoop in as CEO to humiliate me?" The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed, but the genuine distress in her eyes stopped me. "Celia, I had no idea you worked at Meta when the board first approached me. It's a company with thousands of employees. The fact that you're here is a coincidence." "A coincidence," she repeated skeptically. "So, it's just chance that after years of me being more successful, you happen to become CEO of my company." I sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern of Celia making everything about herself. "This isn't about you," I said gently. "I was hired because of my track record and vision for Meta's future. Your presence here wasn't a factor in my decision to accept the position." "So what happens now?" she demanded. "Are you going to fire me? Demote me? Use your power to get back at me for all those times I overshadowed you?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before: insecurity. Beneath the polished exterior and bravado was someone desperately afraid of losing her perceived status. "I'm not going to do anything to you, Celia," I said quietly. "You'll be evaluated on your merits, just like every other employee at Meta. If you're as good at your job as you've always claimed to be, you have nothing to worry about." "That's it?" she asked clearly, expecting something more dramatic. "That's it," I confirmed. "I don't want special treatment for my sister, positively or negatively. I just want everyone at Meta, including you, to do their best work." She seemed momentarily at a loss for words, as if this reasonable approach had caught her off guard. "Mom and Dad called me this morning," she said finally. "They couldn't stop talking about how proud they are of you." The note of bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "There's room for them to be proud of both of us," I pointed out. "It doesn't have to be a competition." "Easy for you to say now that you've won," she muttered. I shook my head. "I won't anything, Celia. I've earned a position through hard work and strategic thinking, just like you've earned your positions. The difference is that I never needed to put you down to feel good about my achievements." She flinched slightly at that, but didn't argue the point. "So where do we go from here?" she asked after a moment. "Forward," I said simply. "I have a company to lead, and you have a role to play in that company if you choose to stay. And maybe, just maybe, we can start building a healthier relationship as sisters too." Celia didn't respond to that, just gave a small nod before brushing past me out of the bathroom. I knew better than to expect an immediate transformation. Years of unhealthy competition and ingrained behaviors wouldn't disappear overnight, but it was a start. The first 6 months, as CEO, were both exhilarating and exhausting. I worked relentlessly to learn every aspect of Meta's business, meet key employees at all levels, and begin implementing the strategic vision I had presented to the board. Some of my initiatives were met with resistance, others with enthusiasm, but gradually, the company began to transform. Celia and I maintained a professional distance at work. She neither sought special treatment nor faced any discrimination because of our relationship. In fact, when she led a successful client retention initiative, I made sure she received proper recognition. At family gatherings, a new dynamic slowly emerged. My parents, initially shell-shocked by the revelation of my career success, began to take a genuine interest in my work. They asked questions, listened to my answers, and spoke proudly of my achievements without diminishing Celia's. Celia struggled with the shift in attention, but over time seemed to relax into a world where she didn't have to be the singular star. At Christmas dinner, 6 months after I became CEO, she even asked my advice about a career development question, a small but significant step. What I've learned through this journey is that true success isn't about proving others wrong or seeking external validation. It's about finding your path and pursuing it with integrity and determination, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. For years I worked in Celia's shadow, unseen and unacknowledged by those whose recognition I most craved. But in that shadow, I developed strengths and skills that ultimately led me to greater heights than I might have reached if I'd been constantly bathed in praise and attention. There's a certain freedom in being underestimated. When no one expects greatness from you, you're free to define success on your own terms, to take risks without fear of disappointing others, to build something authentic rather than performative. I still have days when I look around my CEO office and can hardly believe this is my life. Not because I don't think I deserve it. I know exactly how hard I've worked and what I've sacrificed to get here, but because the path was so unexpected, so different from what I or anyone else might have predicted. If you're in a similar position, overlooked, underestimated, living in someone else's shadow, I want you to know that your time will come if you stay true to yourself and your vision. Don't waste energy trying to convince others of your worth. Channel that energy into building something meaningful. The right people will notice when it matters. As for Celia and me, we're still writing our story. There are moments of tension and old habits that die hard, but there are also new moments of genuine connection and mutual respect. We're learning slowly but surely that there's room enough in this world for both of us to shine. Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends who later had to eat their words? Or have you been in Celia's position, having to adjust? When someone you discounted achieved unexpected success, share your experience in the 4B comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder that being underestimated can sometimes be your greatest advantage. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the people who truly matter will see your worth even when others don't.